Part 8. The Epilogue. Is this another one of Rosemine's recipes? The taste is different from the other ones we ate during spring prayer, Eckert remarked, eating the sweets known as cookies that were being served at Ferdinand's estate. It seems that they lacked the proper cooking utensils on the road, not to mention that these are flavored with tea leaves, Ferdinand replied. He had taken a liking to tea cookies, so whenever Rosamine had her chef make cookies in the temple, she had extra made just for him. She forced quite a few sweets into my hands when I said that I would be meeting Karstedt in my estate, Ferdinand continued. Rosemine's sweets all come in a variety of flavors, allowing her to make them to suit the taste of whoever she is meeting with. According to her, this pound cake was baked with wine-soaked fruit, which is Karstedt's preference. I eat it at times myself, as it is low on sweetness and strong on wine. Eckert found it a little strange being told facts about his father's preferences that even he didn't know. Rosamine had been a commoner with the devouring until only recently when she was baptized as his sister. Shortly after, she was adopted by the Archduke and Archduchess to bring Ehrenfest wealth in the form of mana and developments in the printing industry. Rosamine was raised in the temple and has thus met with father only a small number of times, Eckert said, following her story that Karstedt was her birth father. And yet she knows his taste so well I cannot understand it. It is simple, really. Rosamine is selling her sweets recipes to Elvira for use at tea parties, where much information is shared. According to her, it is only natural to research the preferences of your customers so that you might sell them what they wish to buy. This is much more the attitude of a merchant. But learning the partialities of those one wishes to negotiate with is a skill that even nobles must learn. She uses all manner of means of manipulation to sell me expensive recipes as well, Ferdinand said casually. Not everyone would understand what he truly meant since he had phrased it so dryly, but he was actually saying that Rosamine had a talent for exploiting people's preferences in negotiations. Eckert had known Ferdinand for a long time and knew exactly how harsh he was, so this statement came across as exceedingly high praise. I truly did not anticipate you entrusting all of your meals across spring prayer to Rosamine's personal chef, Lord Ferdinand. Unique recipes or not. I did not entrust all of them to her. I offered to have my chef's help in order to lessen the burden on hers, but she refused, saying it was clearly a plot to learn her recipes for free. Having no other choice, I settled for merely providing the ingredients, Ferdinand said in a dissatisfied tone, taking a bite out of a cookie, but he had missed Eckert's point entirely. Rather, I am surprised by the fact that you were not at all suspicious of poison. In all but the most extraordinary of circumstances, nobles did not allow their chefs to mingle for fear of their food being poisoned. Ferdinand was a cautious man, and he, more than anyone, was always circumspect, and yet he trusted Rosamine, so much so that it was hard to believe he was acting his usual self. She had certainly eaten first to demonstrate the lack of poison, but never had Eckert ever dreamt that Ferdinand would proceed to eat as well, without first having his attendants do further poison tests. The same could be said for the cookies they were eating right now, that he accepted them after she had forced them into his hands, knowing that he would be serving them to a guest, and would thus have to try them first himself as the taste tester, was something Ferdinand never would have done in the past. It was unthinkable. I am somewhat unsettled since I do not understand what leads you to trust her so much, Lord Ferdinand. It had taken Eckert a very long time to earn Ferdinand's trust, so he was a little jealous seeing how quickly Rosamine had won him over. What made her so trustworthy? What was it that made them so different? Eckert had pondered those questions all throughout spring prayer, but he had found no answers. Rosamine appeared to be nothing but a burden on Ferdinand, be it the situation in Haas, her ill constitution, or all the problems that had occurred while they were gathering ingredients. And yet, despite him grimacing and complaining each time she caused problems, Ferdinand actually seemed to be enjoying himself. He regularly took the time to check up on her, almost as if observing the growth of a precious plant, and freely gave her expensive potions. While this might have seemed normal considering his position as her guardian, anyone who knew Ferdinand would be absolutely shocked. At the very least, he wasn't behaving anything like the man Eckert knew. Why do I trust Rosamine? First and foremost, because she was raised in the temple and lacks the deceptive proclivities of a purebred noble. But there are many other things I have seen with my own two eyes. I cannot speak of them here, but suffice to say, I was quite thoroughly convinced. When Ferdinand said that she was raised in the temple, he did so with the understanding that Eckert knew the truth. In other words, he was saying that he trusted Rosamine because she had grown up a commoner rather than a noble. Eckert saw this as enough of a difference between him and Rosamine to satisfyingly answer the questions that had plagued him. Lord Ferdinand, the Honorable Lord Karstedt has arrived. Loscom answered as he brought Karstedt into the room. Since getting married and moving out, Eckert rarely ever entered his family home unless summoned, making this the first time he had seen his father outside of the knight's order in quite a while. Karstedt exchanged greetings with Ferdinand, took the seat offered to him, and then looked at his son. Eckert, you once again have my thanks for your help, he said, referring to him having taken guard duty during spring prayer. Think nothing of it. I am simply glad to have been given the opportunity to work with Lord Ferdinand again. Please continue to send any such assignments my way. These words came from the heart. Eckert had been relieved of duty when Ferdinand entered the temple, meaning he could no longer follow him. The only time he was allowed to accompany Ferdinand, albeit in reduced capacity, was when he returned to the castle on official business. But even then he had been instructed to step down when Veronica, the Archduke's mother, was present. Ferdinand could come to the castle more openly now that Veronica had been arrested, and he was one of Rosmine's guardians, though he was only allowed access for Rosmine-related reasons. Eckert was simply glad to have opportunities to accompany Ferdinand, so much so that he was even willing to join in religious services such as spring prayer, under the guise of protecting his little sister for his worried father's sake. Ferdinand took out 2 sound-blocking magic tools and set them down on the table. Hold these, if you will. Rosmine's ingredient gathering was being done in secrecy. It was something only to be discussed with the use of magic tools, even when in Ferdinand's estate. So, Karstedt began, was Rosemine so successful this season as she was in the winter? Indeed, it was a terrible experience for us, but the gathering itself was an enormous success. Ferdinand described the unpleasant and rather mysterious events that had unfolded on the night of Floo train to Karstedt. There was the Tau Frost extermination carried out the day before, Rosmine's high beast being kidnapped in the dead of night, a mana barrier that would not allow men to pass through, shining balls of mana floating beneath the red moonlight, Rosmine's song offering causing the Ryrens to grow, the gathering of the nectar, and the mysterious power that had faded along with the morning sun. Eckert spoke about how they had seen the leaf shrink beneath Rosmine's feet as she stared at the sky, and how Ferdinand had rushed forward on his high beast to rescue her before she hit the ground. Ferdinand grimaced and said that, in its retrospect, there had been no need for him to rush so much when rescuing her. He hardly sounded like the same Ferdinand that had balked at the shrinking leaves, pounded his mana against the thinning barrier over and over again until it shattered, and then blasted into the sky on his high beast at maximum speed. As Eckert blinked in surprise, Ferdinand took a sip of tea with his brow deeply furrowed. Falling into the spring would not have harmed Rosmine in the slightest. She fell into it the day prior while we were hunting the Tau Frosks, and emerged unscathed, he said with a displeased look. Do you recall how she said the water was mysteriously comfortable and breathable? She wouldn't have died from falling into it. The spring would have protected her. That was enough for Eckert to put the pieces together. He was feeling uncomfortable about having yelled at Rosmine to use her high beast when ultimately she hadn't needed to. We don't know whether the spring would have protected her from a fall that high, Lord Ferdinand. I still believe that catching her was the best course of action, Eckert said. At that, Karstedt crossed his arms with a difficult frown on his face. That is abnormal. I have never heard of anything like that. Indeed, it was a night that cannot be explained by conventional wisdom. Furthermore, there is the nectar harvested from the Ryrens that Rosmine grew with her mana. It has many unexpected properties for its kind. First of all, from there Ferdinand began to expound on the harvested nectar in great detail. What they had gathered on the night of Floo train apparently differed considerably from the nectar that Justice had gathered on another day. The nectar's mana capacity is completely abnormal, likely due to the enormous quantity of mana that gathered around the spring's Ryrens on that night. Not only does it have considerable more mana than the nectar that Justice brought us, its water purity is spectacular. I can hardly even sense any other elements within it. On top of all that, despite the common understanding that materials dyed with another's mana was usable only by them, Ferdinand had found himself able to overwrite and dye the Ryren nectar that Rosmine had produced. He made sure to emphasize this fact, excitement creeping into his voice as he made it clear that this was a discovery that could potentially overthrow the established knowledge taught in the Royal Academy. But while Ferdinand was something of a researcher, Karstedt was a knight through and through. In other words, he wasn't particularly interested. He nodded along with the explanation, but his apathy was becoming increasingly clear. Like father, like son, Eckert thought to himself. He had refrained from saying anything since he enjoyed seeing Ferdinand so enthusiastic. But he wasn't interested in this kind of research either. Justice, on the other hand, would have most likely been on the edge of his seat. Oh yes, he would have, considering what we know of him. I am exceedingly curious to discover whether this nectar is special due to it having been gathered on the night of Floo train, or due to Rosmine's mana. I would also like to do further research into the Night of Floo train's effects on the goddess's bath, but not only does the barrier prevent men from entering, the mana there seems to have a psychological influence on those it comes into contact with. Ferdinand said regretfully, coming to the sad conclusion that this endeavor would be unreasonably challenging to complete. Realizing that this was a good stopping point for the current conversation, Karstead looked at Eckert, who nodded in response. Their silent communication was a success. They both wanted to change the subject changed. I see, Karstead said before quickly moving on. I think it's every time you give one of your reports, but it's one surprise after another when it comes to Rosemine's gatherings. I was especially surprised to see her use Leidenschaft's spear as a weapon during the Schneesturm hunt. I knew that the Knight's Order has no weapon suitable for someone with her mana capacity, but I never would have thought that one of the temple's decorations could be used in such manner, and I certainly never expected it to contain such devastating power. He mused, stroking his mustache. Naturally, the fact that Rosemine could give the entire Knight's Order a blessing from Angriff, the god of war, was an astounding feat in itself, but Eckert had already received her blessing enough times that Leidenschaft's spear left a much bigger impression on him. The Schneesturm had been raging in the middle of a blizzard so intense it appeared as a wall of solid white, and followed the Order's simultaneous attacks to weaken the beast. A single streak of blue light had shot down from the sky and destroyed it in one fell swoop. Yeah, that's quite impressive. Even with Ferdinand and Karstead attacking that thing, they couldn't do a whole heck of a lot to it in comparison. I too found myself enraptured by that shining blue spear. Did you know that the temple's divine instrument could withstand being used in battle like that, Lord Ferdinand? A temple of each duchy has a set of magic tools called the divine instruments, and I found ancient records that detailed them being used for practical purposes. Magic tools can be used by anyone who dyes them with their mana, and since Rosemine cannot use a staff, I thought the spear would serve as a perfect weapon for her, Ferdinand explained. This was probably something that only an avid book reader like him would know. He delved into all sorts of works that no normal person would. Mine probably would. Karstead nodded just as impressed as Eckert was, but while you may interpret its performance during the Schneesturm battle as a sign that the spear is a powerful weapon, the divine instruments are certainly not convenient to wield. You cannot use them as your own weapon without filling them to the brim with a staggering amount of mana, and due to this tremendous requirement, they best serve as single-use weapons. They cannot even be compared to the personal weapons one can form with their staffs. Ferdinand casually identified the spear as a weapon that required a ton of mana to use, which was his roundabout way of saying that Rosemine had a staggering quantity of mana. She was a commoner with a devouring who had managed to survive until her baptism, and yet she possessed that much. Her very existence was abnormal. Imagine how much she'll have when she gets older and comes of age, because her mana will grow with her. Speaking of which, I heard that Rosemine was engaging in some cutthroat business in the castle to pay for the Schneesturm's phase stone. What happened to her budget? Karstead asked. Rosemine regularly moved between the castle and the temple, but as she generally spent more time in the latter, Ferdinand was tasked with managing her budget. The funds needed to pay the Knight's Order had already been accounted for in that regard, and yet Rosemine had been working to make her own money. Rosemine has gotten it into her head that whenever she needs money, she must earn it herself. She doesn't even consider any alternatives. Well, I mean, that's probably partially due to being a commoner and partially due to her life in Japan, where you did normally earn whatever money you needed, whether you needed to or not. When she brought on new retainers, I informed her that Sylvester and you would cover the cost, but you can see how much good that did. When Ferdinand told her that her dads would pay for the retainers, Rosemine immediately endeavored to earn money to pay them back. Eckert concluded that his little sister's very weird grasp on how money worked was due to her having been raised a commoner. She seems quite determined to earn money for herself, to the extent that she is absolutely adamant about being financially self-sufficient. Perhaps she simply has a fondness for earning money. As of now, I decided to leave her be. Her actions stimulate Ehrenfest's economy and encourage movements within the political factions. That said, I do find it necessary to intervene when she sells unauthorized images bearing someone else's likeness. Ah, those, Karstead said with a wry smile. Oh, he's talking about the images she sold of Ferdinand during the Hartsfield concert. Oh god, I can't wait to see that animated. It's going to be so freaking hilarious. They were, of course, referring to 3 particular illustrations of which Elvira, Justice, and Eckert each owned a complete set. Both Elvira and Eckert had been bemoaning that no more pictures of their kind would ever be released from that splendid artist. Yeah, you could blame Ferdinand for that one. Going forward, I believe she is dedicating herself to book production rather than illustrations. She has always had her sights set on books, and they will sell more among the noble children than illustrations ever would, Ferdinand said with audible relief. but his expression soon turned into a grimace, and he began tapping his temples. Is something the matter, Lord Ferdinand? I fear for the future. There are only so many children to buy books as study materials, and once a single book has been purchased, it can be shared among siblings. More children would undoubtedly be born in the future, but her sales base will not be growing very quickly. Either she will shift to inventing new products, or she will pull off some ridiculous scheme to increase existing sales. Whatever the case, she will do something problematic without fail. And what might she do exactly? If I knew, there would be no cause for concern. It is near impossible to predict what ideas her deranged mind will produce, Ferdinand said, searching his memories of Rosamund's past words and actions for clues of any sort. She mentioned something about having asked her Gutenbergs to improve the printing press, but what else? Something about wanting to experiment further with paper. Which reminds me, she had a meeting with Gebe Ilgnir during the winter and intends to visit his province within the next few years, according to a report from Riarda. Could that be it? Will the inevitable disaster occur in Ilgnir? Talk about having a good memory, Eckert thought to himself, as impressed as always. But Karstedt shook his head. You should worry about the summer gathering before that. Something unexpected has occurred during each gathering attempt so far, and I doubt things will go any differently in the summer. Have you decided on whether you'll be going to Mount Lowenberg or Mount Balschmied? Ferdinand grimaced, his brow tightly knitted. Mount Balschmied would be the safest choice, but only Mount Lowenberg has an ingredient that will match the quality of what we have gathered so far. I intend to acquire racefalk eggs. Mount Lowenberg, huh? Racefalks were giant white fey beasts of the flying variety, known as the birds that calmed Ladenshaft, the god of fire's wrath. They were fairly strong, and stealing their eggs had to be done quickly. Would Rosamund be able to manage it with her clumsy movements? They would need to move quickly and spare as many Lowenberg fey beasts as possible, or else Ladenshaft's wrath would explode. In the past, Justice had put them all in grave danger by stealing too many eggs, forcing Ferdinand to use several valuable fey stones to save all their lives. In any case, there is one thing that Eckert knew for certain. The summer gathering would not end peacefully. I've got a feeling on that, yeah. Winter debut in the playroom. How far have I got left? Oh my god, 49 more pages. But that's technically counting a few pages, at least probably 5 pages for the afterward. Winter Society began with the winter baptism ceremonies and debuts. I was serving Lord Wilfrid, whose father, Ob Ehrenfest, had threatened to disinherit him unless he learned the alphabet, basic math, and a Harpspiel song before his debut. My master's life had changed dramatically from that point onward, and after spending each day working his hardest, he managed to grasp that which he had previously ran away from. And now he was playing the Harpspiel while singing a song on stage, showing all the gathered nobles that he was worthy to be called the Archduke's son. Lord Wilfrid, how wonderfully you've grown, came an awed voice. It was Oswald, his head attendant, moved almost to tears as he gazed up at the stage. I can understand how he felt. Lord Wilfrid's retainers had all been working themselves to the bone to ensure he completed the Ob's tasks within the month, and a bit they had been given, and while his master spent his days studying to secure his inheritance, Oswald had been struggling with an increasing shortage of staff. I personally had less to do since we guard knights no longer had to chase after Lord Wilfrid each and every day. But Oswald had dramatically more work, which makes sense. Most of the retainers had been assigned to him by Lady Veronica, now more than half of them had been let go. That's because they weren't doing their jobs properly. But of all the retainers forced to quit, none had been replaced. Lady Florencia had wanted to assign replacements, but this was something Oswald had pleaded against. Wow, he was against that, even though that would make his workload more. Were Lord Wilfrid to fail his tasks and be disinherited, then his new retainers would have their honors stained forever after only a month of service. As such, it was decided that his new retainers would not be assigned until after his winter debut, which makes sense. In reality, Oswald just didn't want Lord Wilfrid to become distracted adjusting to his new retainers, especially since he was exhausted enough as it was. To all the retainers who had done their best to support their lord since the news he would be disinherited, seeing him successfully play the Harpspiel for his debut brought them more joy and pride than anything. Pretty moving to see how much Lord Wilfrid has grown, eh, Oswald, I said. Up until recently, I had spent my days as Lord Wilfrid's guard knight, chasing after him whenever he ran away or was off playing pranks, so seeing him change his lifestyle and make his debut as a proper member of the archducal family warmed my heart too. He really had worked hard, so much so that surely nobody would have any problem with him becoming the Archduke. Not the Ob, not the other nobles, and not Rosamine. Rosamine had dropped by to check up on Lord Wilfrid during her sparing castle visits. She would always taunt him one way or another while critiquing his attendance. She would say, for example, that they weren't working hard enough, that they were slacking due to having made a little progress, and that they were being too soft on him before firing them on the spot. Wow. Then she would look at how much progress Lord Wilfrid had made and ask whether that was really the best he could do. Although she had Lady Florentia's permission to do so, Rosamine was speaking completely out of turn for a child, and it had been pretty terrifying to see the building resentment toward her from the nobles she had gotten fired. Ooh, that's going to probably come back and bite her in the butt later. That said, when I warned Cornelius about it, he said it was no big deal. Today of all days, I imagine we can praise Lord Wilfrid without Rosamine complaining about it. Indeed, Lampert, I know that our days of vigilance must continue, but I imagine Riarda will not look daggers at us for rejoicing on this fine day. As Oswald and I exchanged looks and a quiet chuckle, Lord Wilfrid finished his performance and descended from the stage with his music instructor. Congratulations, Lord Wilfrid. Your debut was a complete success, Oswald began. The sight of your regal behavior upon the stage warmed my very heart. Lampert was moved as well. The other retainers quickly followed suit, each proudly offering him their heartfelt praise. Surrounded by his retainers, Lord Wilfrid lowered his voice and asked a quiet question. I must have a few notes, though. Was it really a success? Both the Archduke and Archduchess looked very proud, answered Linhard, one of his attendants. Your hard work has undoubtedly been rewarded, Lord Wilfrid. Looking a little embarrassed, yet overwhelmingly happy that his efforts had been recognized, Lord Wilfrid returned a smile. It was a smile brimming with the satisfaction of having achieved victory through hard work, and one that he hasn't ever given while being protected and spoiled by Lady Veronica. I pray that your success and vigor continue long into the future, Lord Wilfrid. Right, I should do what the son of an Archduke must do, he said, puffing out his chest with regal determination. I felt an abundance of pride at his gesture, but also relief that my position as his retainer was safe. Of course. Unfortunately, this special moment we attendants shared was soon smashed to pieces by none other than my own little sister. Rosamine, called Ferdinand the High Priest, and there she was. My little sister, the newly adopted daughter of the Archduke, gracefully advanced upon the stage. Her hair was like the night sky, adorned with a unique flower-decorated ornament. The Ob introduced her as the Saint of Ehrenfest, a noble girl born with a miraculous amount of mana and a merciful heart, who had already worked to save orphans and establish entire new industries. But I wasn't so sure this was a wise move. The nobles were clearly suspicious of the story, and Rosamine in general, as anyone would be, and it seemed to me that such a grand title would serve as nothing but a heavy burden. Regardless, Rosamine remained calm during the introduction, wearing a refined smile that made it clear she never expected anything less. I knew her from the temple well enough to guess that she was actually panicking on the inside, but that didn't show on her face. Eckhart had always said that there was no point in comparing someone trained by Lord Ferdinand to a kid spoiled by Lady Veronica. Actually, yeah, you have... It's like comparing apples and oranges. There's no contest. Rosamine is always going to be better because, Ferdinand is the one who freaking trained her. And Wilfrid was spoiled. You can see how that went. But the difference between them was clear as day. The way Rosamine had warned me about spoiling Lord Wilfrid despite him making steady progress just went to show how hard she was being worked by Ferdinand, which made me feel a little sympathetic. A high-pitched note resounded through the hall. Rosamine had begun playing the harpspiel handed to her by her instructor. The rhythm with which her youthful hand strummed the strings produced notes so beautiful that they were on an entirely different level from the children before her, and she was playing one of her original songs that I had only ever heard while she was practicing. To top it all off, her young singing voice perfectly rounded out the performance. Now consider me impressed, said one noble. This song is complex enough that it could be taught in the Royal Academy. It seems that she is as impressive as the Ob said, replied another. Keep it up, Rosamine, you can do this. My little sister had given both Lord Wilfrid and myself a second chance, and now it was time for her debut. I hadn't spent as much time with her as Cornelius had given that he had served her as a guard knight, but she and I still shared a familial bond. Oh, please. Oh, God. I know they don't share a familial bond because they're not technically biologically family, but you can still have a familial bond, but that's still such a short time, though. Right? Wasn't it like around spring or the beginning of summer when all this happened and she got adopted? Whatever. I watched on thinking that my little sister was incredible even when it came to playing Hearthstone when suddenly... What? Out of nowhere, Rosemine's hand began to shine with blue light. It seemed to be coming from the ring that Father had given her during her baptism. But why, when those things were basically only used for blessing someone during a first meeting? There was only one answer. She was performing a blessing. Unintentionally, I might add. The blue light flowed out with each note played on the harpsichord, spreading through the large hall. I hadn't seen such a large-scale blessing since Rosemine's baptism, and while it had been surprising enough to see her bless all 200 of the visitors who had been invited there, she was now blessing every single noble in Ehrenfest. But why would she do this? My awe was soon followed by a wave of anxiety, and I quickly went from thinking how incredible this was to worrying what was about to happen. Her baptism blessing was pretty impressive, but this is something else, Lord Wilfrid said, looking up at the blue light impressed. But we, his retainers, were anything but happy. The winter debut was supposed to secure Lord Wilfrid's right to be the next Ob. That had been the agreement. But now it appeared that his role had merely been to make Rosamine look better. A development that made his other retainers visibly worried and annoyed. Well, that's probably not her intention, obviously. Maybe Ferdinand's, but not hers. At the baptism, Rosamine had apparently been instructed by Father, Lord Ferdinand, and the aunt to bless all those attending the ceremony. Had they instructed her to do the same again? Nope. That was entirely her bad. We had spent the autumn doing our utmost to ensure Lord Wilfrid did not fall behind Rosamine, and yet it happened anyway. It was as though both our and his hard work had been trampled on. They are not... His hard work has not been trampled on. She is just very, very weird. Very abnormal. Why are they having her do this when it's both her and Lord Wilfrid's debut? I reflexively shot an angry look at Father, Lord Ferdinand, and the Ob, but there I saw that everyone, the Archduke, the Archduchess, my parents, and my brothers, were looking at the blue light with surprise. This apparently hadn't been planned. Instead, it was happening suddenly and without warning. What are you doing, Rosamine? Not intentional, I just said. I watched on, holding back the urge to shout at her to stop until she eventually finished playing her song. A few scattered claps could be heard throughout the hall as the nobles hesitated, unsure of how to react to such a large-scale blessing. Behold, the saint of Ehrenfest, Lord Ferdinand declared, speaking in his authoritative night tone while holding a royal-looking Rosamine high in the air. May she be blessed for the wealth she brings to our home. The nobles who had previously hadn't known how to react took out their staffs and gave blessings themselves, doing as Lord Ferdinand had instructed. For a moment the suspicion struck me that Lord Ferdinand might have ordered the large-scale blessing in secret, since he alone seemed icy calm. But judging by how he quickly strode out of the hall as Rosamine waved to the crowd, I could guess that he hadn't expected it either. With Rosamine gone, the Ob stepped onto the stage to quiet the stirring nobles. I imagine it is clear to everyone that Rosamine is rich with mana and beloved by the gods. She is the saint of Ehrenfest, and she shall bring new industries and much wealth to our duchy, he said. But despite this being nothing more than a quick cover-up for the impromptu blessing, the Ob's words appeared to have shifted the attitude among the nobles. They had quickly gone from seeing the title as an exaggeration to believing it was quite fitting indeed. Splendid. I would expect nothing less of my granddaughter. Oh! Oh, okay, so this is... Shoot. This is, Karlstadt's father? Indeed, Lord Bonifacius. I, too, am overjoyed from the bottom of my heart that an Archduke candidate of Leisgang blood has been born. I shall have to direct my house to provide her support. Rosamine's blessing had been a surprise to all of her caretakers, but that wasn't how the nobles were viewing this event. House Leisgang and his affiliates had been treated coldly by Lady Veronica for decades, and now they were rejoicing over the birth of an Archduke candidate who carried their name. Mother and Eckert were constantly reminding them that Rosamine had no intention of ever becoming the Ob, but few showed any sign of actually accepting that. We've prepared many new recipes today, which I imagine many of you have been looking forward to most of all, the Ob began. The food will soon prove to be a significant weapon in Ehrenfest's favor, so enjoy it to your heart's content. The gifting ceremony shall be performed after lunch. The Archduke's schedule was thus changed, and it was easy to imagine that all sorts of meetings and adjustments to plans were about to happen. My anger toward Rosamine's caretakers faded, replaced with unease over how the nobles were reacting. Father and Ob Ehrenfest had both made it clear that they had absolutely no intention of making Rosamine the next Ob, but now that Lady Veronica had been removed from power, noble society was shifting into an era of Leisgang control. Would they really allow Lord Wilfrid to become the next Ob? It was clear for all to see that Rosamine's mana capacity far surpassed his, as she had all the dignity and grace of an Archduke's daughter. Whether she herself wanted it or not, I could see no future in which people did not rise to support her taking the position. Uh-oh. So there might actually be a faction that supports Rosemine being the Ob. Oh dear. I could tell by the unhappy, anxious, and betrayed looks on the faces of my fellow retainers that they were all thinking the same thing. And in the midst of all that, Lord Wilfrid alone wore a grin as he walked to the dining hall for lunch. My debut is going so well has really made me hungry. Maybe it's a relief. Lord Wilfrid mused aloud. Anyway, I'm glad lunch was moving forward. They're serving some new recipes that Rosemine just came up with. You like her food too, don't you, Lampret? His words made the tension drain from my body. He was right. His debut had been a success. And all that disinheritance talk was now a thing of the past. It was best to just celebrate that and think of ways to further support Lord Wilfrid. Rosemine's food certainly is good. I am looking forward to it as well, Oswald intoned. There was one order that we retainers all needed to carry out during the feast. Gather information. So that was what we did. Then, once Lord Wilfrid had been put to bed later that night, we prepared to gather and discuss what we had learned. Among the remaining retainers, I was the only one who was a member of the Lies Gang faction, and I was Rosemine's older brother. As a result, it fell to me to ask my parents about Rosemine's plans, and inform the others about House Lies Gang's future intentions. Leaving the night guards to watch over Lord Wilfrid, the other retainers and I all went to Oswald in his room. As we waited in the darkness, he was the one to break the silence. We have managed to avoid Lord Wilfrid being disinherited. All we can do now is believe in the Ob's word and continue as we have been. Indeed, we should focus on doing what we must to prepare him for becoming the Ob, the true next Ob. Another retainer replied. These Lies gangs were all excited to have Lady Rosemine take the role, but it's still possible for Lord Wilfrid to get Lady Veronica's faction on his side. Exactly. Lady Veronica's faction will surely support Lord Wilfrid until the end of their days, and they still outnumber the Lies Gang faction. They'll be strong allies. Different retainers had different opinions, but since most of them had been scouted for their jobs by Lady Veronica in the first place, they all found themselves acting as though she was still around. I went ahead and put a stop to that. Hold on a moment. Clinging to such assumptions is dangerous. Explain yourself, Lampret. Right now, only Lady Veronica and her retainers have been arrested, but no decision has been made regarding how her followers or large will be handled. If we rush things and carelessly bring former members of her faction into our own, we would hardly be providing Lord Wilfrid with a stable foundation to build upon. I think we should keep our distance and play it safe, instead starting with neutral nobles. Oswald fell into thought for a bit, then nodded in agreement. Lampret's correct. It should not be an issue for us to reach out to members of Lady Veronica's faction, but only after their potential punishment, or lack thereof, has been decided. For now, we should focus on raising Lord Wilfrid to be the next Ob, and our priority should be getting him as many gifted retainers from the children's playroom as possible. He was choosing to let the adult circumstances play themselves out, as we dedicated our attention to getting Lord Wilfrid trustworthy friends to have by his side at the Royal Academy. Lady Charlotte's baptism ceremony will be held next year, and it is expected that the three of them will be competing for retainers. Rosemine will likely be attempting to bring as many gifted female retainers as possible under her fold, so we should do the same with male retainers for Lord Wilfrid. As boys and girls were segregated within their dorms at the Royal Academy, nobles seeking retainers would customarily prioritize those who were the same gender as themselves. This did not apply to scholars and knights, but attendants were so closely engaged in their master's private life that this was a necessity. Lord Wilfrid must do everything he can to ensure he does not appear inferior to Lady Rosemine within the playroom, Oswald said. While I could see his point, I knew it would be a hopeless effort. Lord Wilfrid had almost been disinherited due to his incompetence, and it was Rosemine who had written up a study plan to set him straight. She had even praised and taunted him to bring out his motivation, something that she was far better at doing than any of us, since we weren't used to doing anything but complimenting him. If she kept up that momentum and took control of the playroom, it was hard to imagine Lord Wilfrid being able to do anything against her. I understand your point, Oswald, but there is no way for us to avoid Lord Wilfrid looking inferior to Rosemine. The children would undoubtedly be flooding the playroom, hoping to hear her Heartspiel song and see her blessings. The retainers all faltered. They probably knew that their expectations were unreasonable. While that is true, there must be something we can do to support Lord Wilfrid, Oswald replied. Do you have any better ideas? At this rate, Lady Rosemine will steal the position of Ob without fail. Are you not Lady Rosemine's older brother, Lampret? Certainly you know of some weakness she possesses, Linhart added, visibly hostile towards the thought of the Ob seat being taken. Oh, God. I smiled. This is how it's supposed to be. We were the ones at fault for standing idly by when Lord Wilfrid was decreed to be the next Ob. There's no need for us to view Rosemine as an enemy. We need only emphasize the attributes that Lord Wolfried has that Rosemine does not, I said. The retainers all grimaced, clearly finding it hard to believe there was any area in which Lord Wolfried prevailed. Physical strength, stamina, that's some things. It seemed they had been so focused on Rosemine's strength that they hadn't noticed how terribly unfit she was to be an Ob. She had a clear weakness that there was no doing anything about. And the one attribute that immediately comes to mind, I continued, is a strong and healthy body. How could Rosemine ever become the Ob when she's so weak and sickly that she collapses simply from walking too fast down the hall, and can't even participate in the entirety of dinner before having to leave early to rest? I spoke to my parents and Lord Ferdinand during the feast, and it seems that none of her guardians intend to make her the next Ob. No matter how skilled she is, she was adopted to support Lord Wolfried, not replace him. The retainers gasped and exchanged looks, both relieved and unsettled at the fact that Rosemine couldn't be the next Ob despite her enormous talents. In their hearts, they wanted their liege, Lord Wolfried, to build an Ob, but in truth, they knew that Ehrenfest needed a talented leader with plentiful mana. That is true. Maybe once she gets the Jareve, maybe that will help some? She'll just need to build up her stamina after that. If that's what they think as Lady Rosemine's guardians, then Lady Charlotte might prove to be a greater threat, Oswald said. After all, she was raised by Lady Florencia to oppose Lady Veronica. His words took me by surprise. I had never thought of it like that. I had, of course, expected Lady Charlotte to compete with Rosemine for retainers, but not once had I considered that she might also be a potential Ob. Or a possible Ob. Lady Veronica never would have allowed this while she was in power, but while Lady Rosemine certainly is an overwhelmingly stronger Archduke candidate on the female side, if she is not named as the next potential Ob, an opening will be created. But as you just said, Lady Charlotte is a female Archduke candidate. That gives Lord Wolfried an advantage, doesn't it? The retainers were nodding among themselves, as so long as Lord Wolfried continued working in a manner befitting an Archduke candidate, it would be increasingly difficult for Lady Charlotte to bridge the gap between them. Sylvester defeating his older sisters in their battle for succession had made that more than clear. This also meant, in other words, that Rosemine was such an overwhelming figure that she could easily overcome the gender barrier. In that case, we shall guide Lord Wolfried to work alongside Lady Rosemine rather than opposing her. If we can establish a good rapport now, then it should be possible for us to easily secure the Lysgang's support in the future by having Lady Rosemine and Lord Wolfried marry, Oswald declared, clenching his fists. Nobody disagreed with him on that matter. There will be nothing better than the Lysgang faction gathering beneath Rosemine, and Lord Wolfried directly inheriting the political base that Lady Veronica had constructed in the past. This is more realistic than sickly Rosemine becoming the next Ob. If she truly was adopted just to support Lord Wolfried, then Father and the others are undoubtedly planning for her to marry him if possible. Yeah, that's kind of been brought up before. Even Mine said that in the past, that most likely they would have her do that, but she didn't mention whether she liked that or not. The next day, the playroom was due to be held. During breakfast, we explained to Lord Wolfried what would happen there. As our priority had been ensuring that his debut was a success, we hadn't spoken much of what came after. So, there are going to be introductions on the first day. I just need to sit in the chair and listen to people introduce themselves to me, right? And then I need to watch the other kids and pick the best retainers. Hold on, I'm just trying to make sure I keep an eye on that. I'm probably going to have another freaking story after this. That is correct. You do not have to choose today, however. There is much time to consider this matter over the next 3 years leading up to your enrollment in the Royal Academy. These retainers will spend time with you throughout the entirety of winter while you are a student. They must be gifted, of course, but on top of that you will want to pick individuals cut from the same cloth as yourself. Both parties will have nothing but a bad time if you disagree on too fundamentally of a level. It was dangerous to take on a retainer who had no intention to serve you. It not only heightened the threat of betrayal, but also risked destroying the future of a retainer if they were relieved from duty. There was no way to avoid this besides successfully flocking with birds of a feather. The other nobles will judge your ability to lead the playroom to see if you have the skills required to be the next Ob. In this regard, please work together with Lady Rosemine, Oswald said. Lord Wolfried responded with a slightly worried look. Oh, there's no cause for concern. As long as you actively move around the room and display your strength, everything will go smoothly, said one retainer. In fact, this is something that will be hard for Lady Rosemine to do, added another. Lord Wolfried crossed arms in thought and nodded. Right, Rosemine is weak enough that she even needs to practice walking. I'll take charge when it comes to moving around. The playroom was packed with students, and everyone's eyes were on Rosemine and Lord Wolfried. There were long lines of those waiting to introduce themselves. while the students who had already done so were busy speaking to the kids who weren't old enough to go to school yet. In a normal year, the archnobles would be flexing their status to the lay nobles, and the children who had just finished their baptism would be rushing to mingle with their factions as soon as possible. But none of that was happening here. Instead, the students were teaching the younger kids about the academy, showing off their academic excellence, and loudly discussing their lessons in overbearing voices while shooting brief occasional glances at Rosamund and Lord Wilfrid. What used to be a time for men nobles and lay nobles to search out archnobles to protect them had become something much more peaceful. Seems like this year's students are on the softer side, I observed. Of course they are. There are Archduke candidates in attendance, and the fastest way up in the world is to become one of their retainers, Lionheart added. The kids here need to be cautious until they've learned more about the candidates' personalities and what they like. The playroom will undoubtedly be quieter for a number of days at the very least. He was right. It would be beyond foolish to suddenly start bullying others right in front of an Archduke candidate, especially one known as a saint who showed mercy even to orphans. As such, everyone here shared the same wise idea that it was best to hold back on wielding their status like tyrannical clubs, at least for the time being. I wasn't seeing anyone being openly antagonistic about factions either. It undoubtedly helped that not even a full year had passed since Lady Veronica's arrest, and that the shifting power balance between the adult factions hadn't yet calmed down. I looked across the kids in the room, quietly observing the children who would be going to the Royal Academy at the same time as Lord Wilfrid. Oswald had asked me to form as many bridges as I could with nobles of the Lies Gang faction. I suppose I should try reaching out to Alexis and Hartmut once the Royal Academy sends out grades. Or no, it's likely that Cornelius will be approaching them for Lady Rosamund's sake. He's so overprotective of his sickly little sister that he's probably already vetting her retainers, and if I wait too long, the two of them will be snatched up before I can secure them for Lord Wilfrid. The day before Cornelius departed for the Royal Academy, I returned home and visited his room as he was packing his things. "Cornelius, do you have any plans for Rosamund's attendance?" I asked. But despite all the rumors about how overprotective he was, all Cornelius did was blink in confusion. "Not really. She's in a weird position where she visits the temple a lot, and despite being adopted by the Archduke, she won't necessarily be in the running for the position of Ob. It'll be hard for her to secure any retainers, unless they have some reason to be completely stricken with the duration." Cornelius apparently had no intention of actively scouting any retainers for Rosamund. I began to wonder whether I had been getting a little overprotective myself, having thought about reaching out to find retainers for Lord Wilfrid, but after a pause, Cornelius continued. "And well, both mother and father told me not to, so it seemed that our parents had instructed Cornelius not to get involved in Rosamund's selection process, under the assumption that he did not intend to continue serving as a retainer or arbitrate between their recommendations." "You're planning to quit, Cornelius? You won't stay her guard knight?" "I only became her guard knight under the condition that I could quit when it was time for Rosamund to pick her retainers. But the truth is, I still haven't decided whether or not I want to stop serving her. She's not a bad mistress, but..." Cornelius trailed off, pausing for a moment before voicing his concerns. "Daniel came to serve her as punishment, while Bridget does for the sake of her home province, Ilgnir. Angelica didn't even think about declining when Father summoned her to discuss the matter. Well, I don't think she thought about anything at all, really. But my point is, I still don't really understand what it feels like to want to serve one person for your entire life. Continuing to serve Rosamund wasn't too bad of an option, but that wasn't a good enough reason for Cornelius to make such a life-changing decision. I had once gone through similar fears, so I could empathize with the unrest that he was feeling. Yeah, this is no state in which to be thinking about Rosamund's retainers. Lamprecht, why did you choose to continue serving Lord Wilfrid? You could have left at any time." While Lord Wilfrid's retainers were being fired one after another, Oswald had said that I was free to quit of my own volition. Lady Veronica was no longer around to force Mother's hand, and now that my little sister had been adopted by the Archduke, there was no need for me to continue serving Lord Wilfrid if I didn't want to. I looked down at Cornelius, who was wearing a worried, brooding expression. Perhaps I had made the same face back when I had this same discussion with Mother. If I had to give a reason, I'd say that I stayed because Lord Wilfrid needed me. Plus, I saw no reason to try and serve anyone else when I hadn't even been acting like a proper retainer. In that regard, I thought that Lord Wilfrid and I could grow together, but you don't need to hear all that. Those things never have clear answers. You'll have to come to your own conclusions, I said, patting Cornelius on the head. He looked up at me, now looking more uncertain. You choose to serve him because you weren't doing a good enough job? That's a lot different from Eckert's reasoning. Eckert is abnormal. He won't be a good role model to learn from. You won't find anyone to serve with standards like that. The look in my eyes became distant as I thought about how Eckert always prioritized his master far above himself. There weren't many people who would be so stricken for a certain individual that they would continue to follow them even after being relieved of duty. It was standard to change who you served based on trends and circumstances. Father serves the Ob as the Knight Commander, and Eckert will risk his life for Lord Ferdinand while remaining unwilling to serve anyone else. I'm sure that living around them has warped your perception of how things should be, but nobody expects unwavering loyalty at the start. It's up to the masters to prove whether they are worth it. Eckert is abnormal? I had assumed that one would need feelings that strong to pick a master, so I'm glad you disagree. I'll try thinking this over some more in an attempt to find my own reason to stay with Rosemine, Cornelius said as he turned, the unease having vanished from his expression. In my eyes, Cornelius had made his decision the moment he started actively looking for reasons to continue serving Lady Rosemine. But I didn't need to point that out to him. The students headed for the Royal Academy gradually vanished from the playroom until eventually only those who would be spending the entire winter there remained. It was then that Rosemine abruptly took out a deck of cards and suggested that everyone play together. The kids quickly divided themselves into groups based on their future school years, and the experienced players mingled with the older kids. Needless to say, the two experienced players dominated. Lamprecht, Lanhert, I couldn't win against Rosemine, but I beat everyone older than me, Lord Wilfrid declared. His confidence was recovering fast, but the older kids had likely been told by their parents to accommodate him. This theory was further supported by the fact that they didn't seem frustrated to have lost. Rather, they were looking at the chill for Lord Wilfrid with kind eyes. It was clear as day that they had let him win. Ooh. Rosemine noticed this as well, and after briefly allowing just the slightest trace of annoyance to slip on her face, she smiled brightly and looked around the kids. We will be at an advantage for some time thanks to our experience, but each of you will need to have won at least once by the end of winter. Otherwise, we can never consider trusting you to be our retainers. Isn't that right, Wilfrid? Lord Wilfrid merely looked at her in confusion, but the other kids all tensed up. I look forward to playing with you all again. Starting tomorrow, I shall give sweets to the best player. It seemed that Rosemine had no intention of allowing the other children to accommodate her and Lord Wilfrid, and to this end, she would be bringing sweets made by her personal chefs. The kids would normally have to wait for such confections to be handed down to them, but now they were right there within their reach. In an instant, the men nobles and lay nobles all became deadly serious, staring hard at the Carta. This development also meant that the archnobles wouldn't be able to keep half-heartedly accommodating them. Their very worth would be called into question if they lost to men nobles and lay nobles. In a single day, Rosemine had forced all the kids to take the game seriously. Not bad at all, Lionheart murmured. I'm not in agreement. She had manipulated them with such skill that all we could do was sit back and watch it play out beautifully. It was really hard to believe that the youngest-looking child in the playroom had accomplished such a feat so deftly. But this wasn't the first time that Rosemine had acted well above her age. After rousing the children with cards and playing cards, Rosemine worked with Professor Moritz to teach the kids, granting each one as much time as an Archduke candidate would receive. Just watching from Lord Wilfrid's side, I could see them becoming more capable by the day. While everyone was studying under Professor Moritz, Rosemine would spend her time quietly reading thick, complicated-looking books she had borrowed from the castle's bookroom, and writing stories to print in the future. She had apparently advanced far enough under Lord Ferdinand's instructions that she was already prepared to enter the Royal Academy, so there was no need for her to relearn the same material alongside everyone else. Okay. Among other things, Rosemine was usually busy writing down the stories told to her by Feline, reading aloud from the picture book, and occasionally dominating in card tournaments to keep Lord Wilfrid motivated. It was clear for all to see that she was no student, but an instructor just like Professor Moritz. Forget about Lord Wilfrid looking inferior, it's like Rosemine's on a completely different level from everyone else. But either due to her being so overwhelmingly out of the ordinary, or the fact that she was constantly reading thick books despite her poor health, the more energetic boys kept their distance. It seemed they were unsure how to interact with her. Seeing this, Lord Wilfrid definitely took the lead. Let's hone our skills while we can and beat Rosemine by any means necessary, he declared, holding a strategy meeting when Rosemine returned to the temple for the dedication ritual. Rosemine's absence always led to the boys becoming more active. The girls, on the other hand, became a lot shyer and more docile, largely refraining from playing cards and playing cards at all. They kept their distance from Lord Wilfrid and watched this group with caution. Both Rosemine and Lord Wilfrid tended to befriend those of the same gender as themselves. Considering the retainer selection process, it was actually good for them to separate at times. But the girls seemed a bit stifled without Rosemine there to offer her support. In the end, both she and Lord Wilfrid were necessary. Lady Rosemine is really good, though. How can we beat her? One boy asked. This was Ignaz from the neutral faction, Traugott from the Lies Gang faction, and Isidore, Lawrence, and Roderick from the former Veronica faction, all gathered together in a group that transcended the wars between their respective factions. It was heartwarming to see them huddle up and bash out strategies. By now they had long forgotten about accommodating the Archduke candidates, and they were more than ready to beat Lord Wolfred at cards to win the suites. The playroom's atmosphere was just perfect, and as I watched Lord Wolfred take charge over the kids, I felt that I could see a future leader of nobles within him. Hopefully he can at least secure Ignaz and Traugott as retainers. As his retainer, I wanted to do as much as I could for Lord Wolfred, and thoughts of ways to help passed through my mind as I watched him talk excitedly with his future school friends. Ooh, here we go. The High Bishop's exclusive business. In short, the Carpentry Guild has been ordered to finish the monastery recently built in Haas with everything it needs. The new High Bishop wants it done as soon as possible, in 2 months' time at the latest. Her representatives are Gustav the Guildmaster and Benno from the Gilberta Company, and it seems they're willing to pay any price to make up for the tight deadline. They're also talking to the Construction Guild about this, but we're not going to lose to them when it comes to furniture and other interior furnishings. All workshops, put everyone you can on this. These were the words of a higher-up in the Carpentry Guild, having summoned every foreman in the city of Ehrenfest who was a member. They all stood up shouting out with motivation, but I merely sat there in a daze. Hey now, what's this supposed to mean? I supposedly had the High Bishop's exclusive business, but she hadn't mentioned anything about building a new monastery in Haas. And she definitely hadn't talked about bringing such a large-scale order to the Carpentry Guild. The normal process was for clients to bring business like this to their exclusive workshops and have that workshop bring it to the guild. Oh, is this, dang it, what was his name? Ignace? Something like that? The guy who was, who came to Rosemine for, to ask her if she still is using him exclusively or something? I think that's who it was. The two would then cooperate to distribute the work while considering how much money needed to be used. And yet, not only had I not been informed of this job, but I also hadn't been listed along with the Guildmaster and Benno as representatives. Do I not have the High Bishop's exclusive business after all? Yeah, this is definitely him. I had done several jobs for the High Bishop ever since the Dostal workshop, which worked for Benno, sent her my way. She had wanted me to make the printing press for her. Yeah, this is her. This is him, I'm sorry. We had handled the wood that the orphanage used for winter handiwork. The Gilberta Company had told us, as an intermediary, that she was satisfied with our work, and the foreman of the Dostal workshop kept saying that he wouldn't have sent the girl our way had he known she was going to become the High Bishop. So I'd assumed that I had her exclusive business. Was I wrong, or did she drop me at some point for not doing a good enough job? A cold sweat ran down my back, and I could feel my hands trembling. It was like someone had dunked a bucket of ice-cold water over my head. My workshop was the youngest of all those in the Carpentry Guild, and its status could change dramatically based on whether or not I had the High Bishop's exclusive business, especially since she also happened to be the Archduke's adopted daughter. Without it, my workshop's future would be shrouded in darkness. Oh, it's Ingo! That's what his name was. Hey, Ingo, you're up next, the guild representative said. I stood up to hear what my share of the work would be, at which point he instructed me to build the window panes for the monastery. At that, I responded with a nod and exited the guild. The sky was bright and the sun radiant, shooting down summer rays that were hot enough to burn the skin. There were plenty of carpentry workshop foremen out in the street, excited about the large jobs they had been given. One of them, the foreman of the Dostal workshop, noticed me and came walking over. He gripped my shoulders, brought my face up close to his, and whispered, Ingo, you weren't named as a representative up there, and you weren't divvying up the work with them either. What happened to you having the High Bishop's exclusive business? He had pretty openly voiced the fears stirring in my heart. I wanted to call him an idiot on the spot and say that of course I had her exclusive business. But with everything that had happened, I wasn't so sure myself anymore. My hesitation to respond turned into an answer itself, which earned me a nasty grin from the foreman. Alright, guess that means this job's my big chance, huh? By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. He had already concluded that my workshop hadn't done satisfactory enough work for the High Bishop, which had in turn led to me losing her business. All the foremen in the guild would now be vying for her business themselves, whether I liked it or not. I returned to my workshop and told my craftsmen about their work we would be doing for the monastery. There's a large-scale job starting right now, and they need it done quickly. Two of my Laharls let out excited cheers. Under any other circumstances, a big job for our workshop would be something to celebrate, but I had to shake a bitter hand to quiet them down. Linus, Demo, this isn't anything to be happy about. The High Bishop gave this job to the Carpentry Guild. She didn't speak to me about it beforehand, and I wasn't listed as one of her representatives. We might have lost her exclusive business. The smiles were immediately wiped from their faces, but my wife, Annika, simply laughed off my concerns. Why get all gloomy about that? It's not like she actually said you lost her business, right? She said, she didn't, but there won't be any opportunities for me to ask her what she thinks about our workshop, and there's no one I can really send to her either. She could drop us out of nowhere and we'd have no idea. Annika was right that it wasn't a done deal, but as a commoner, I couldn't just visit the High Bishop anytime I wanted. Checking with her would certainly be for the best, but she was beyond the reach of a mere craftsman like me. Oh, you're such a worrywart. There's no reason to fret when she's loading orders onto you as much as she is. When she calls you over to make her next order, you'll know for sure. All you need to do in the meantime is finish the job you've been given. Do good enough that you can puff out your chest with pride and show the other workshops why it is that the High Bishop trusts you. Annika said, slapping me on the back with a hearty laugh. She was on the smaller side, but she had the energy of someone twice her size, and seeing her broad smile was enough to brighten my mood a little. Aren't you being a little too optimistic? You think so? You only lose exclusive business if you do bad work, and all we've ever done is satisfy the customer, right? She asked, peering at me with her gray eyes. I knew well enough that she was just trying to ease my anxiety and cheer me up, and I definitely couldn't let my fears get the best of me with Annika and the Laharos watching. And so I straightened my back and kept my chin up. You're right, agonizing over this won't change anything, but yeah, back to the matter at hand. We're going to be living in the new monastery to get the job done. There's a meeting at the Merchants Guild for all the workshops that'll be staying there, so I'll be attending that as well. The explanation was being held at the Merchants Guild rather than the Carpentry Guild for 3 key reasons. The Guildmaster was one of the High Bishop's representatives. They were delivering the down payments, and foremen from the Construction Guild will be participating as well. I looked around at the crowd on the second floor of the Merchants Guild and noticed there were quite a few unfamiliar faces. We were told that they wanted multiple foremen to essentially take turns sleeping in Haas's monastery to do work, and that we would also need to bring women, our wives, daughters, and hired servants along with us. There were plenty of rooms for us to stay in at the monastery, but there weren't any doors or window panes yet, and we would need to drag in mattresses and other daily necessities ourselves. So they're saying we can't even sleep there until we've made the doors and window panes. We've got to hurry and make them fast so we can leave. Your daily necessities will be brought to the monastery by wagon, the Guildmaster began. And since it's bad for business to have foremen away from their workshops for an extended period, you will take turns staying there overnight. 3 of you gather here today, your workshops will be leaving first. Or those of you gathered here today, your workshops will be leaving first. Your respective guilds have selected their fastest workshops for this, and while the workload would no doubt be strenuous, I trust you all to succeed, and naturally your pay will vary according to the quality and quantity of your work. We won't hesitate to pay extra to cover for the abrupt nature of this job, he concluded, flashing several small ghosts to the crowd as encouragement. The foremen all grinned at the sight. This job will be easy since the ivory buildings nobles live in all use the same measurements for their windows and doors. Let's make a ton of them here, and then a ton more once we're in Haas, one said. As for food, the Offmer Company was apparently distributing the work among various eateries that will be bringing their foodstuffs to sell at the monastery. We had also been told to buy things from Haas and the surrounding farmers, alongside several other warnings about living there. With the explanation finished, the foremen all started to return home. That was when Benno from the Gilberta Company called out to me. Ingo, could you come here for a moment? I went over, ignoring the prying eyes from the other foreman, at which point Benno continued. Don't forget you've got exclusivity with Lady Rosemine. You'll be staying at the monastery from beginning to end, so don't slack on your preparations. As it turned out, they needed someone on site to give instructions, directing which workshop products would be going where, and I had been chosen for that role. It was a bit of a relief to know that Benno thought I still had the High Bishop's exclusive business, but I still had to make sure. Hey Benno, do I really have her exclusivity? I asked carefully, wanting a clear answer. Benno just returned an ambiguous shrug. I know she counts on you as one of her Gutenbergs, but what, has she never mentioned you having her exclusive business? That's news to me. Had I known that, I wouldn't have listened to the Dostal workshop complaining to me day in and day out about having missed their chance. Don't need to know about that. What I'm saying is, if I really have got her exclusive business, why wasn't I told about this? A job this big must have been in the works for months. All the carpentry and the construction workshops in the city were being mobilized, and the project needed to be finished in a month or two at most. For a job that required the movement of this many skilled people, it had to have been planned well in advance, or so I thought. Benno simply grimaced, shook his head, and raised 3 fingers. Nah, this all started 3 days ago. Say what? Benno gave me a quick rundown of the situation. Construction of the Italian restaurant, jointly financed by the High Bishop, the Gilberta Company, and the Offmer Company, had been completed, and a lunch had been scheduled prior to its opening, with the Archduke himself due to attend. Apparently, at the table, she had asked to build orphanages outside the city to increase the number of workshops she had available. The High Bishop's been talking about wanting more orphanages for a while now, and at the time she hadn't intended to make it an ivory building. She was going to talk to some construction workshops and then ask some carpentry workshops for the interior decorations, build it like commoners would. Basically, the plan was to hire lower city craftsmen once we got permission from the Archduke to build an orphanage there. Yeah, I can't even imagine starting something like this before you've secured permission from above. Benno's story made sense to me. You couldn't move forward with a big project like this without the Archduke's permission. But in that case, how had things turned out like this? I crossed my arms, encouraging Benno to continue, and he looked up at the sky, a distant look in his eyes, as though he was remembering the day it all happened. Lady Rosemary mentioned this all to the Archduke, hoping to get his permission, and the very same day, they used some kind of magic to build the entire monastery. Then they ordered us to have it furnished quickly enough so the orphans can live there and start work in the workshop by the harvest festival. Now that's just crazy talk. Everything's crazy when you deal with nobles. The guildmaster and I are representatives for this, just because we happen to be eating at the Italian restaurant as its financiers. If you want to be a representative too, just go and ask Lady Rosemine. Really? I exclaimed, leaning forward. Getting myself recognized as a representative would make the greedy looks on all the other foremen's faces disappear in an instant. Benno nodded with a grin. Yep, we're still openly recruiting representatives to help pay the Carpentry Guild and the Construction Guild for their work ahead of time. There's a lot of money we've got to scrape up since this deadline's so tight. Never mind, forget it, that's too much for me. My workshop needed to be saving for winter prep, so we didn't have any cash to dump on other guilds. Big stores like the Gilberta Company and the Offmer Company were in another league from us when it came to investment power. And while spending this money would be the easiest way for me to establish the Ingo workshop as having the High Bishop's exclusive business, it just wasn't a feasible option for me. Guess I've just got to prove myself with the quality of my work instead. For now, I'll stay at Haas and do what I can there. And so I moved to Haas with Annika and stayed in the under-construction monastery, focusing on work while all the while craftsman after craftsman came to the monastery, and since I stayed there from start to finish, I ended up learning all of their names and faces. Since so many Ironfest workshops were being mobilized, there were quite literally crowds of workers at a time, with even carpenters from neighboring cities and towns coming over. It really was a shockingly large-scale job. We weren't quite able to finish in a single month, but the monastery was ultimately furnished without any significant problems. As far as I was concerned, the Ingo workshop had done a good enough job that nobody could accuse us of having lost the High Bishop's exclusive business. With the job done, the Gilberta Company's apprentice Laharl Lutz came over to ask about winter handiwork. Ango, sorry to bring this up right after the monastery business, but can I place an order for some more work, he asked, bringing us the usual request from the High Bishop. Annika beamed and puffed out her chest with pride, her grey eyes practically shining. See? What did I say? It's all fine, you haven't been dropped at all. The job request was a huge relief, especially now that the Laharls could relax and focus on work. We soon finished up the winter handiwork preparations for them, at which point Lutz came to us with yet another job from the High Bishop. This time it had to do with improving the printing press. She wants me to talk to the priests actually doing the work in the orphanage workshop and then make improvements based on their input. I've got her exclusive business for sure, I declared, bringing the work orders to the Carpentry Guild. But the guild representative's suspicious look didn't change even as he glanced over the sheet. Doesn't the fact that the printing press needs to be improved means that you didn't do a good enough job for the first time? No, the first time was to get the bare minimum of parts together to make it work. We were planning to improve it from the start. Just like the monastery, it had been a job where time was of the essence. But explaining that didn't change the doubt in everyone's eyes. The guild representative raised his eyebrows as he looked between my determined glare and the work order. Say what you will, but this is still an improvement job. Try getting a signature saying that you have her exclusivity once you get the done. Then nobody can doubt you. I grit my teeth and restrained myself. There was no point in pushing the subject. All I could do now was finish the job and bring back some kind of proof. If my workshop's reputation kept plummeting like this, it could risk impacting the jobs we were getting from other customers too. Hey Lutz, you were talking about how Lady Rosemary can't go to the lower city now that she's the High Bishop, yeah? Huh? Oh yeah, she can't just up and visit commoners like that anymore. Lady Rosemary really misses the times where she could just go and do what she wanted where she wanted. Lutz was taking me and my Laharo demo from the Gilberta Company to the temple. Can't she visit the workshop in the temple's orphanage since that's not in the lower city? Yeah, kinda. She sometimes visits in the afternoon to watch us work for a little bit. The High Bishop used to visit the lower city workshops herself to get what she wanted, and it was pretty likely that she would come and double-check the work I was doing. That meant there was a good chance I could speak to her, and with that thought in mind, I looked down at what I was wearing. The same work clothes I always wore at the workshop. There was nothing else I could really wear, considering that I was going to work. But something told me that it wouldn't be a great idea to meet the High Bishop like this. It's actually kind of bad for a foreman to be walking around the north part of the city. Ingo, what are you looking at your clothes for? Lutz asked curiously. I raised my head. He didn't seem to know the position that the Ingo workshop was in, although there wasn't much helping that. Merchants could usually go to the Merchants Guild rather than directly to the carpentry workshops. Don't sweat it, I replied. I was just thinking about the job. There wasn't any point in me talking about my crappy circumstances to someone who didn't know about them. Once we reached the temple, I looked up at the gate. There was a gray priest standing there serving as a guard. Lutz shrugged, then went over to talk to him. Nolt, this is Ingo from the Gutenberg and his apprentice, Demo, here to improve the printing press. Lady Rosemine has permitted their entry. Hello, Lutz. Gil told me about this visit. You may pass. Unlike when religious ceremonies were being held, only the side door to the gate was open. We passed through, and the air around us changed in an instant. The busy clamor of the city faded as we were enveloped in an abrupt silence that pronounced each footstep. It was so quiet that I hesitated to say anything at all as we walked to the boys' dorm where the workshop was. Ingo, Lutz said. His tone and attitude changed the instant we were inside the temple. We invited you here to improve the printing press, but the esteemed Lady Rosemine wishes for you to first discuss matters with the Grey Priests, basing your improvements on what they believe will make it easier to use. You sounded just like the priest in the temple. The fact that a kid who wasn't even 10 years old could change his tone so suddenly left me stunned. I was also working hard to absorb the habits and language of my customers, so that I could work my way up and do business with richer customers, but I had gotten my Baruch certification by focusing on my own skills while only making the hand contracts, and the foreman I worked for at the time had never taken me anywhere. It was only when I first delivered the printing press to the temple's workshop at the Gilberta Company had I learned they completely changed how they spoke and acted when visiting nobles. Guess I should expect as much from an apprentice working for a big store that does business with nobles. Who knows what kind of training he's been put through. The orphanage's workshop was in the basement of the boys' building. I had brought Demo with me since he had been there when we delivered the first printing press, but I could tell how nervous he was. Attention everyone, please state your thoughts on the current printing press, Gil said. Lady Rosemine wishes to improve it with the aim of making it as quick and easy to use as possible, so that it might print more goods. Gil was the boss of this workshop, and given how he was about the same height as Lutz, they were probably of a similar age. But even though he was still a kid, he was one of the High Bishop's apprentice attendants, meaning he had the most authority out of anyone in the workshop. The Great Priest nodded, then lined up in front of me and Demo before smoothly stating their opinions. I would appreciate it if placing the typesetting board on the press could be made easier. The closer we could keep the ink to the press, the better. Placing it further away would create more mess. Could you add somewhere for us to put ink-related goods, preferably around here? While the priests all wore the same kind of ragged clothes, they spoke in a polite manner, completely unlike the craftsmen in the lower city as they listed their desired improvements. Hold on a second, I gotta remember all this. Make it easier to put down the typesetting board, add a place to put ink stuff. It would surely be difficult to memorize the opinions of so many people. May I suggest writing them down? One Grey Priest suggested, holding out a pen and what appeared to be a botched sheet of paper. He had a point, but the extent of my writing experience was putting together work orders for the Carpentry Guild, and even then, Annika was always the one who did the math. Aside from the things I was used to writing as part of my job, the words just didn't come to me. That said, he was being kind here, and it would be flat out impossible for me to memorize everything otherwise, so I went ahead and took the pen. Excuse me, but you've misspelled that word, one Grey Priest noted, having received one heck of an education despite being an orphan. I scratched my head awkwardly. I couldn't correct my mistake because I didn't know how to actually spell the word, but I couldn't just say that while working for the High Bishop. As I stood there, grimacing with the pen in hand, one of the Grey Priests spoke for me. Gil, please write in Ingo's place. I believe that his time would be better spent focusing on the printing press, observing the aspects we find inconvenient, and how we wish to improve them. Fritz is correct. Please practice using the printing press yourself, Gil said, snapping me back to reality as he took the pen and paper from me. I knew that the Grey Priest named Fritz had helped me out, knowing that I couldn't write properly. I raised a hand to express my thanks. He nodded with a smile and whispered something to Gil, who then turned to another Grey Priest. Bartz, please prepare the printing press and go through the process with Ingo and Demo. The writing shall be done by Fritz. Understood. That brief exchange made it clear that the workshop wasn't being run entirely by Gil. There were adult Grey Priests helping out as well, which made a lot of sense considering he was still a child. In lower city workshops, only those with technical skills and experience were allowed to become foremen, so inexperienced kids without a good grasp on the work that needed to be done were never put in charge of anything. It was weird to me that the adults in the orphanage's workshop obeyed Gil and Lutz when they themselves were stronger and more experienced. This is apparently just how things are in noble society. And this is how you print using the press. The priest named Bartz explained. Demo and I had both tried it out ourselves. Since the printing press was just a simple modification of a normal press, the process required a lot of arm strength, just like juicing things did. There was a stand nearby for holding the ink and paper, but it didn't take me long to understand why they would want something that was actually on the press itself. So you'd want the paper around here, right? I asked, touching the press. Lutz promptly reached out from the side and pointed at one area in particular. Rather, could you just put a thin box at a slight diagonal angle here on here? The papers are roughly the same size, so it would be ideal if you could make it with this in mind. Alright, that'll make it easier to prevent from this angle. I imitated the act of putting the paper into place to get a feel for it, all the while impressed at Lutz's ability to give a concrete explanation of what he wanted. The tool for applying the ink could be put here, Lutz continued, going on to list a bunch of suggestions. I nodded, still impressed, but each improvement made me more and more confused. He was being bizarrely specific. Though I let him continue, I was increasingly suspicious that he knew more than he was letting on. I needed to satisfy the High Bishop, and the more suggestions he had, the better. The work will apparently be a lot easier and need less power if you make a slidable stand that has the paper and lettering on it. That way, all you need to do... push it beneath the press and then pull it out again. Lutz said, speaking as though he had suddenly just remembered, but the fact that he said apparently made it pretty clear that there was someone who already knew what a finished printing press would look like, and they were just giving him directions. Hey, Lutz, someone knows exactly what we need to do here, don't they? I asked, glaring at him and Gil. If someone knows that stuff, then there really isn't any need for me to listen to what the Grey Priests think. I can make the printing press the High Bishop wants just like that. But Lutz trailed off, conscious of everyone around us. He was definitely hiding something, and it ticked me off. I needed to do a perfect job here to satisfy the High Bishop and save my plummeting reputation. I was in dire straits and didn't have time to play around. If you want the printing press improved, then let me speak to the person who knows what the finished product should look like. You planning on wasting my time with pointless trial and error or something? I exclaimed, causing the Grey Priest to jolt and take a step back. I hadn't said that much, but the air in the room had very blatantly changed. The calm on the priest's face immediately vanished, and they looked at me with guarded expressions. Huh? I wasn't yelling. I was yelling at Lutz, not them. I furrowed my brow as the priest exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even though I hadn't said anything to them, the atmosphere was unusually off now. Lutz looked around the workshop, then scratched his head with a sigh. Look, Ingo. We're from the lower city, so we're used to people yelling at the drop of a hat, and I understand that this is seen as normal there, but here in the temple, violence is forbidden. Nobody yells or gets up in anyone's face. All that does is scare people. Should we step outside? I'm sure you'd rather talk like we're in the lower city. Violence is forbidden? Nobody yells. The heck kind of a place is this? Yeah. Yeah, you're in another world, essentially. This place had a culture entirely different, unlike the lower city. I could feel that in my bones. Lutz's explanation had made it clear that we were the odd ones here, not the priests. Sorry, Gil, but could you collect and summarize everyone's opinions? Ingo and I shall finish this talk outside. Lutz directed me outside, even asking Demo to accompany us when I tried to leave him behind. Only Gutenbergs are allowed inside the workshop to protect the orphans and stuff. We can't let you stay in there alone. You mean I'm not a Gutenberg anymore? It's not my place to say, Lutz replied as we left the temple and returned to the bustle of the lower city. I was finally back where I belonged. Lutz had said that we can continue our discussion at my workshop. The Gilberta company was closer, but Demo and I weren't wearing good enough clothes to enter a northern store. When we eventually arrived, Lutz spoke up the moment I closed the door behind us. I get that you want to speak to the person who knows what the finished press should look like, Ingo, but that's Lady Rosemine. She can't just up and talk to lower city craftsmen anymore. She had been baptized as a noble before becoming the High Bishop, so her status wasn't allowing her to casually speak to lower city commoners anymore. That can't be true. You've been speaking to the High Bishop, and you said that she visits the workshop every now and then. I shouted, hitting the table. Lutz raised an eyebrow, and that's true. But what do you think a craftsman's going to be treated the same as a merchant from the Gilberta company who's used to dealing with nobles? I don't know what's ticking you off so much, but the temple's full of nobles. Status decides everything there. Plus, Gil's an attendant of the High Bishop. He's basically her representative in the temple. Not someone that's a craftsman like you can just yell at for being unreasonable, he said with a sigh. All you should have done was smile and write down the opinions were given. You were lucky the High Bishop isn't a more heartless noble, otherwise you could have been punished for your insolence. The problem here isn't that she can't come and see you if she wants to, it's that rude commoners like you who don't understand status would take off all the nobles around her. That's why she just avoids meeting them all. And all for safety's sake. If you annoy a noble, you could be killed where you stand. And it'd be your own fault too. What I'm trying to say here is give up on meeting the High Bishop in person. I gritted my teeth. I get that I messed up there. I didn't know how things worked in the temple, but I can't back down that easily. I need to improve the printing press so that my workshop doesn't get shut down, I said, explaining to Lutz that its reputation has been plummeting ever since the monastery job. I don't expect a merchant to get the struggles that we craftsmen go through, but things aren't easy for me right now. The future of my workshop depends on this. Nah, I get you. My father and oldest brother work in construction. My older brothers are carpenters. They all deal in carpentry, actually. My dad, Deed, went to Haas for the same monastery job. I knew Deed. We had worked together at the monastery, and his son Sieg was a hand apprentice at the Dostal workshop. The fact that I actually knew who he was talking about left me stunned. Why is the son of a carpenter working as a Laharo for the Gilberta Company and serving as one of the High Bishops Gutenbergs? I asked, blinking in surprise. Even if he aimed to be an apprentice at a big store, there didn't seem to be any connection here. It's a long story, Lutz replied, refusing to give any more details. He then looked at me with his green eyes. Somehow, it seemed like his sight was fixated on the future. I get that your position in the guild is important for your workshop. Lady Rosemine caused this problem, and I get that. I also get that improving the printing press is more important than anything right now. I'll tell Master Benno what I know about all this, including your perspective as a craftsman, and see whether he can create some circumstances for you to meet her. I owe you one. I negotiated with Benno through Lutz. He sympathized with the plight of the Ingo workshop and agreed to take me to the temple, albeit under 3 conditions. 1. I had to pay an intermediating fee to the Gilberta Company. 2. I could only speak when Benno gave me his permission. 3. I had to be emotionally prepared for the possibility that the meeting would end in my death. Isn't this fee kinda high? 3 large silver just to go to the temple once? Really? I began trying to barter the price down, but Benno flashed me a glare with his dark red eyes. We're putting a hold on store business and greeting nobles in the nobles' quarter, all so you can visit the temple. If you don't like the fee, I can stay right here and focus on my own work. Go by yourself for all I care. I'm sure a craftsman who doesn't know a single noble greeting will do just fine. I faltered. Benno was right. That really would go badly. I don't know how to deal with nobles at all. All right, I'll pay. Happy now? God, this is why you don't deal with big stores. I paid the crazy high fee and endured a lecture on what I should wear on the day of, among other things. Maybe the price wasn't that high after all, given that it included warnings and advice on how to deal with nobles. I wasn't sure why that last condition was part of the deal, but getting a chance to meet the High Bishop was certainly more important. And so I steeled my resolve and headed to the temple, accepting the likelihood that this might be the last thing I ever did. Ooh, it's finally over. Once I exited the temple, having been looked over by knights and priests from head to toe in that stifling room, I let out a sigh of relief. As I looked over the familiar lower city, the tension drained from my body. I had finally secured the contract saying that I had the High Bishop's exclusive business, the thing that I had been agonizing over since the monastery job was first mentioned. I gotta get back and talk with the others about this. When I had originally brought up that our workshop might have lost the High Bishop's exclusivity, both Annika and my Laharos had responded with optimism, but I knew they must have been just as worried on the inside. Her new order was something pretty weird. She wanted me to discuss my work with smiths, but that was something to think about later. Right now, I just wanted to tell them what had happened, and put an end to all the worrying. But while I was enjoying my brief repose, Benno shot me a look, starting to unslick his hair. Idiot, nothing's ever over yet. In fact, this is where the actual problems start. Different professions are going to have to work together on this, and that's not going to end anytime soon. You're going to be sharing the work from here on out. Nah, that can't be right. This is just a one-off. The High Bishop had only brought up this crazy idea because she was a noble who didn't know how craftsmen worked. No other customers would suggest we do anything that was this much of a pain. Everything will be fine as long as we can survive this one job. Lutz shook his head. Come on, do you really think Lady Rosemine's going to do this once and then never again? No, now she's going to think this is normal and do it every time. You might as well expect every job you have from now on to involve you working with people from other professions, he said. A world-wise look on his face. These were the worst to someone who knew Rosemine a lot better than I did. As the worries suddenly started rushing back to me, Benno slapped me on the back. But now that you've accepted it, you've got no choice but to keep it up. You'll need to talk to the Merchants Guild and all the other guilds involved. Then drop by Zach and Johann's workshops to introduce yourself. You should head to the Smiths tomorrow, and I'll send out a meeting request to the Guildmaster for you. If you sent one, it wouldn't even get read in time for the delivery date. Right. Benno listed a bunch of things that I needed to do all at once, but I didn't really understand the groundwork that merchants always did. He must have noticed that from the way I was blinking at him, because he glared at me with narrowed eyes. Get your head in the game, Ingo. You've got to finish all this before the Smiths are due back at the temple. This is something you'd normally have to do on your own without me. This sure is a big mess now. Benno said, crossing his arms, but even then I still hadn't truly realized how bad things really were. It wasn't until I was running around the city to greet everyone involved that I finally understood. We finally completed that cursed Haas job that required us to mobilize every carpentry and construction workshop in the city, and now you're starting some other grand mess, the Guildmaster exclaimed. A printing press built through the cooperative efforts of workshops from entirely different professions. Enough. Settle this matter among the other experts with their grand title, whatever it was. Don't get me involved in this. His desperation to not get involved was what finally made me understand what an unthinkable mess I had gotten myself wrapped up in. And the afterword. Oh boy, I'll get to work on this, and I'll see everybody in the next volume.